His hands shook as he lit the match. Not from cold, not from fear. From something older, a ritual performed for 10,000 years before anyone thought to make it illegal. And here's what nobody tells you. The plant didn't change. The people in power did. What you're about to hear isn't a story about getting high. It's a story about control, lies, and one of the most successful propaganda campaigns in human history. A campaign so effective that its architects openly admitted they were lying, and nobody went to prison for it. 22 secrets, one plant, and a war that was never about drugs. So, before we get into the darkness, this is a plant that clothed civilizations, sailed empires across oceans, and was prescribed by doctors in every major pharmacy in America. Then, in the span of about 7 years, it became the most dangerous substance on Earth. That shift didn't happen by accident. It was engineered. 1. The 10,000-year partnership. Cannabis and humans have been inseparable for at least 10 millennia, with origins traced to the Mongolian steppes and the Tibetan plateau. Neolithic farmers didn't discover it for the high. They discovered it because hemp fibers were among the strongest materials in nature, used for rope, sail, and fabric that could outlast generations. The darkest secret? A plant this ancient, this useful, this deeply woven into human civilization was erased from legal existence in under a decade. 2. The sacred grain that wasn't. In ancient China, hemp was listed among the 5 sacred grains, despite being technically not a grain at all. The oldest known paper fragments dating to the 2nd century BCE were made from hemp. Emperor Shen Nung prescribed cannabis around 2737 BCE for gout, rheumatism, and absent-mindedness. A plant that gave humanity paper and medicine. Remember that when we get to 1937? 3. Herodotus and the Howling Mourners. The ancient Scythians, nomadic horsemen who terrorized the Persian Empire, used cannabis as sacred technology. Herodotus described their funeral ritual: small tents, heated stones, hemp seeds thrown onto the rocks, thick smoke filling the space, mourners inhaling and howling with pleasure. This was a deliberate doorway to altered states used to honor the dead. Anslinger called it a gateway to insanity. 4. Shiva's plant. When cannabis traveled the Silk Road into India, it found a god. According to Hindu legend, Shiva consumed bhang, cannabis mixed with milk, spices, and honey, for clarity and meditation. Bhang remains legal and widely used in India to this day. So while American politicians called it the devil's weed, one of the world's oldest religions was offering it to its highest deity. 5. The naval necessity. Every tall ship that carried European empires across the oceans, every rope, every sail, every rigging, was made from hemp. A single large warship required over 50 tons of hemp. Without it, there was no Age of Sail, no Columbus, no British Empire. The same plant later demonized as a threat to civilization was, for centuries, the literal material civilization was built from. 6. The Founding Fathers' dirty secret. George Washington grew hemp at Mount Vernon. Thomas Jefferson grew it at Monticello. The first drafts of the Declaration of Independence were written on hemp paper. Colonial Virginia mandated hemp cultivation. Failing to grow it could result in fines. Hemp was used as legal tender in some colonies. The crop of the Founding Fathers, the backbone of the colonial economy. Later, public enemy number 1. 7. The Club of the Hashish Eaters. In 1840s Paris, Baudelaire, Dumas, and Victor Hugo gathered to eat cannabis paste mixed with honey. They called themselves Le Club des Hashishiens and consumed cannabis to unlock creative visions. Baudelaire wrote about its ability to distort time and shatter the boundaries of perception. The same substance that inspired Les Miserables would, a century later, be classified as more dangerous than cocaine. 8. The word that started a war. Americans in the early 20th century were comfortable with cannabis, sold in pharmacies, produced by Park Davis and Eli Lilly for migraines and insomnia. Then crusaders made one strategic move. They stopped calling it cannabis and started calling it marijuana, a Spanish word chosen to make it sound foreign and dangerous. That single act of rebranding helped destroy a 10,000-year relationship between humans and a plant. 9. The Mexican scapegoat. After the Mexican Revolution of 1910, waves of immigrants flooded the American Southwest, and newspapers immediately ran stories about marijuana-crazed Mexicans committing crimes. El Paso became one of the first U.S. cities to ban marijuana in 1914, explicitly to control the Mexican population. By the 1920s, over a dozen states had passed anti-marijuana laws, almost all in states with significant Mexican immigrant populations. The drug war didn't begin with science, it began with xenophobia. 10. Louis Armstrong's gauge. In the jazz clubs of New Orleans and Harlem, African-American musicians discovered that marijuana, what Armstrong called his gauge, heightened sensory perception and unlocked transcendent improvisation. Jazz was already viewed as dangerous and sexually provocative. Marijuana became inseparable from that threat. It was no longer just a Mexican problem. Now, it was a Negro problem, and that reframing gave the next man everything he needed. 11. Harry Anslinger's lies. Anslinger was appointed first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics in 1930, and early in his career, he called the idea that cannabis caused violence an absurd fallacy. Then his bureau's budget was threatened. He contacted 30 scientists. 29 said cannabis wasn't dangerous. He presented the one who agreed to Congress. He fabricated Gore files. He blamed marijuana for the axe murder of Victor Licata's family, despite evidence of severe mental illness and no proof of drug use. The truth didn't matter. The story served its purpose. 12. Reefer madness was government propaganda. In 1936, Tell Your Children, later renamed Reefer Madness, was distributed to schools and churches as an educational film. Anslinger fed lurid stories to newspaper editors and warned that marijuana caused white women to seek relations with black men. He understood that racial fear was the most effective tool for shaping public opinion. Hollywood amplified it, Congress believed it, and a plant was put on trial. 13. Prohibition by bureaucracy. The 1937 Marijuana Tax Act didn't technically outlaw marijuana. It imposed a prohibitively expensive tax so complex that compliance was virtually impossible. The American Medical Association testified against the bill. Industrial hemp farmers objected. Their testimony was ignored. Most members of Congress didn't even understand what they were voting on. Almost overnight, a plant cultivated for 10,000 years became contraband. 14. Hemp for victory. Then, forget we said that. When Japan cut off America's Manila hemp supply in World War II, the USDA launched the Hemp for Victory campaign, urging farmers to plant hemp as their patriotic duty. Over 400,000 acres were planted. The demonized plant became a war hero. The moment the war ended, so did the tolerance, and the program was so thoroughly erased that for decades the government denied the film had ever existed until copies were found in the Library of Congress. 15. Nixon's confession. Nixon placed marijuana in Schedule 1 in 1970, alongside heroin, above cocaine. His own Schaefer Commission recommended decriminalization in 1972. He buried the report. Then his advisor John Ehrlichman admitted on record. The Nixon administration's two enemies were the anti-war left and black people. By associating hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, they could disrupt those communities. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. 16. 26 million arrests. Between 1965 and 2020, over 26 million Americans were arrested for marijuana, 88% for simple possession. Despite similar usage rates across racial groups, Black Americans were nearly 4 times more likely to be arrested. In some states, 10 times more likely. In 2020 alone, over 350,000 Americans were still being arrested, 1 every 90 seconds. 17. The AIDS patients who changed everything. During the AIDS epidemic, patients discovered marijuana combated wasting syndrome, reduced nausea, and relieved neuropathic pain. Activist Mari4uana opened the first public dispensary in the U.S. in 1992, operating openly despite its illegal status. He then drafted Proposition 215, the Compassionate Use Act. It passed in California in 1996 with 56% of the vote. The dam had cracked. 18. The historic vote of 2012. On November 6, 2012, Colorado and Washington became the first jurisdictions in human history to fully legalize cannabis through a democratic vote. The campaigns didn't appeal to counterculture, they made a pragmatic case. Prohibition had failed, costing billions and destroying millions of lives. Canada legalized nationwide in 2018. By 2025, over half of U.S. states had followed. 19. The billion-dollar irony. The legal marijuana industry exceeded $17 billion in sales in 2020. Wall Street took notice. Snoop Dogg, Willie Nelson, and Mike Tyson launched their own brands. And here's the darkest part. The people getting rich from legal marijuana are overwhelmingly white. The people who went to prison for it are overwhelmingly black and brown. The same communities devastated by the drug war are largely shut out of the industry built on their suffering. 20. The tax that punishes legal businesses. Marijuana remains federally illegal, so legal cannabis businesses cannot use the federal banking system, forced to operate in cash, targets for robbery. Section 280E of the IRS tax code prevents them from deducting normal business expenses, resulting in effective tax rates of 70% or higher. Legal, taxed, punished, all at the same time. 21. The potency nobody warned you about. Marijuana in the 1970s contained 2 to 3% THC. Today's flower averages 25 to 30%. Concentrates exceed 90%. Growing evidence links high-potency use with psychosis in vulnerable populations. The industry markets edibles designed to look like candy, leading to emergency room visits for children. The plant didn't change. The industry engineered it into something new, and profit came before public health. 22. The debt that will never be paid. The war on marijuana did not reduce use. It did not protect public health. It did not make communities safer. It filled prisons. It cost over $1 trillion. It funded over 300,000 deaths in Mexico's drug war. It destroyed generations of Black and Latino families through mandatory minimums for possession of a plant. And it was built, from the very beginning, on documented, admitted lies. Nixon knew. Anslinger knew. Every administration since has known. The war was never about drugs. It was about who uses them, who controls them, and who profits from them.